Hello, I'm James Warren with the Denver Urbanism Podcast, and today I'm joined for a very special interview with Wes Marshall. Wes is a professor here in Denver at CU Denver. He's the author of Killed by a Traffic Engineer, and he has a pretty new podcast with David Zipper.
I do, yeah.
Called Look Both Ways. It's phenomenal. Right now there's 4 episodes out. I've listened to all of them. I would recommend everybody go listen. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, no, podcasting's been fun so far. Yeah, we're doing our 5th episode next week. So.
Yeah, really puts our podcast to shame. I was like, oh God, we got to be doing that better. We got to be doing that better.
We're figuring it out as we go. The technology's been like the trickiest part, but
always is. Yeah.
I think my microphone is rock solid now. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Good, yeah. We've had to toss out a couple episodes because I messed up recording. But why don't we start with a lot of our listeners and viewers will already know who you are.
Yeah.
But why don't you start with Look Both Ways? Why is your podcast called that?
So it's not called that because we think that's good advice for like a DOT to be giving people, right? It's called that because we're trying to look both ways at transportation issues. Like we start off each podcast by saying it's a pragmatic look at transportation. So we're not trying to be just reactive and say this is bad, this is bad. So when David would say like, oh, fare free transit's bad, I'm trying to look at the other side of it. Like, well, here's some good things about something like that could come out of that. So like, I think the interesting thing about these topics is there's usually no single right answer. So trying to look at things from different issues, like, one of the names we discarded was like roundabout.
Yeah.
Like, looking around the topics. Look Both Ways just kind of rolled off the tongue a little bit better, which...
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know, that's...
Yeah.
Spent too much time coming up with names than
it's a very important part of the process.
Yeah.
So, on the subject of safety, we this past weekend just had another tragic pedestrian death. It happened on 14th Avenue in West Colfax. This is a street that I know particularly well. I used to live in the neighborhood. Now I live in an adjacent neighborhood. And I know all the safety advocates in that area have been fighting specifically about 14th for just years. Sitting down with the director of transportation and all kinds of people from Dottie and saying, hey, people go too fast here. Hey, slow this down. Hey, these are the things that we want. And now somebody's dead. It's not the first time somebody's died in this area. No. So I 2 questions. One, do you have anything that you would say to the advocates who I think are reeling right now and not sure how to feel in this moment? And then 2, do you have anything that you would say to the folks who are responsible for this at a city level?
It's a terrible tragedy. I mean, it gives us something to talk about and try to use to try to get better. At the same time, this should not be happening. We can do better. And, at least on my side of Denver, 13th and 14th are the one-way couplets.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying one way necessarily is bad, but the way they're designed is like a mini highway.
Yeah.
Right. So at one point we were trying to do a research study just to look at the big drop off in property values going from 13th to 12th. Living on some of those one-way streets where cars are moving fast, they're oftentimes 3 lanes of one-way traffic. It would be tough to live on, and I feel bad. But it also is even tougher to walk or bike on. They're not meant for that. I know it's trying to kind of pull some of the traffic off of Colfax, but there are better ways to do it. We have a grid in these neighborhoods. We can use the grid more efficiently. But, trying to do it in the way that we've done it, it goes against everything we know about safety in so many different ways. So you gotta, that's been on my bucket list of things to fix in Denver for a long time. Yeah. So, sadly, when stuff like this happens, it gives the advocates an opportunity to try to talk people into change. Because it's sometimes hard to argue with safety stuff. You've probably been in those meetings where people do say, oh, I don't want this. It doesn't look good. And it's well, this is for safety. And you would never, ever tell a structural engineer to use a bigger beam because some neighborhood crank says that they don't like the size of the beam. But we do that with transportation all the time.
Yeah,
we let the loudest voice in the room tell us not to do something that we know is good for safety because they don't want it for their neighborhood. And that's, as an engineer that was started off on the structural side, it feels crazy to me. But I know full well why that happens, because we've perpetuated some atrocities with highways through neighborhoods and all that sort of stuff we did. So we need this public participation process. But when it comes to safety, we should have some leeway to do what we know is safer.
Yeah, on that subject, I want to start a little bit granular and then maybe zoom out a little bit. So Denver has the Vision Zero Rapid Response Program,
Yep.
where they come in, somebody's been severely injured or killed by a car and or by a car driver, maybe an engineer, I don't know. And they implement some type of solution based on what happened there. I know that sometimes this isn't always done in a way that, I think it's a little underfunded. I'm thinking of one example specifically where they added a lane of parking to a street to, narrow the street a little bit practically.
Yeah.
But you're also blocking in car infrastructure. You're making that a little bit of a less nice place to walk. I mean, there's other kind of ramifications of that. From a Vision Zero Rapid Response, kind of what are you seeing around the world that's working to address some of those safety things? And, what could we bring home?
Well, to start with, I would say the rapid response team is a great first step because most places, when somebody gets hurt, they don't want to change anything because they feel like if they change it, they're sort of admitting that it was their fault in some way. The fact that Denver's willing to go out there and look at what could we have done better and change it in the short term is a huge step forward. So in this country, I'd only known of New York of having a similar type thing. So when Denver started that, I was like, this is great. So my safety class that I teach, we go out there with that team and take a tour of a particular thing. So we see how they work.
Cool.
But when you see how they work too, like one of the members of their team is the officer, right? So the officer is reading off the crash report, and the crash report is blaming the humans for whatever happened.
Sure.
Just the way I talked about in terms of the way all our crashes can too easily be blamed on the humans. So a lot of times they're all listening to that and it's like, oh, we need to educate people better, we need to enforce better. But if you take a step back and look at like these intersections or whatever it is, like the one we saw last time, a lot of the things are so obvious. Like where the pedestrian got killed, they were crossing Spear near Colfax, and where they were coming out of, there's a huge cabinet for the signal right blocking the vision line of the driver that is taking the right turn onto Spear.
Yeah.
There's no way for them to see the pedestrian.
Right.
Like we've designed it in a way that would lead to these bad safety outcomes, and then we get the bad safety outcomes, and the fact that they're out there trying to do something, like that's an issue where how do you move that cabinet? It's hard. It's expensive. So they were trying to do other stuff. Maybe restricting right turns on red would have helped that cause. There's a lot of other things we could do, but the fact that they're out there is a big first step. So how do we do better? Put more money into this. Like get out there and, I actually have told them this, like they need to almost, when they go out to see these crashes, no, don't just kind of walk around the intersection. Like pretend you're doing what that person was doing. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand why they were doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
Because the one we had seen the previous year, like you see where the bicyclist was coming from, and like what they were thinking isn't going to be the same as what we were thinking when we were standing there at the other side of the intersection, kind of looking at the whole thing and in kind of the grand scheme of things. So you kind of have to do it. And then you go to the perspective of the driver and you see where the bicycle's coming from. There's no way they could have possibly seen them because on that part of Colfax, there's that big concrete thing over by like the, whatever. But there are legitimate things that we could fix, but you don't see that unless you kind of put yourself in their shoes and try to understand the situation they were in.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Zooming out to, you've talked about the A pillar on cars. You've talked a little bit about clear zones next to highways and larger arterials. Some of this stuff, I imagine, is like federal, right? Like we're talking like if you want to fix the A pillar, I think on the podcast you mentioned cars have to support 3 times their weight when they flip, and we've got heavier and heavier cars, and that's a result of a federal, the CAFE standards or whatever, and the 3x weight requirements of federal standard. And so like when we look at some of these systemic levers that can be pulled, what can be done locally, and what kind of do we just need to advocate to higher levels that needs to be fixed?
Well, in that A-pillar example, I think I mentioned, it was like a middle schooler from Maryland that designed, basically they had a camera on the outside of the car and they projected what they were seeing on the A-pillar. So when you're driving, the A-pillar looks like it's not even there because it's projecting what you would see.
Right.
Like if a middle schooler can come up with that for their science fair project, it doesn't have to be a federal intervention. Like somebody can do something to make these problems better, and sitting around and waiting for them to, make it an industry standard, I don't think is going to be the the most fruitful way to proceed with this. So I think we can do better, but sometimes it's understanding that this is a problem. I don't think a lot of people understand like what the A-pillar would mean in terms of seeing a pedestrian from your perspective, like stuff like that. But once you understand it is a problem, you look at some of the trucks now, and I'm still the kind of person that will look over my shoulder when I'm changing lanes.
Yeah.
And the way cars are designed now, it's really hard to. Like the blind spots are getting bigger and bigger, and everyone's relying on the technology to save the day. Like I remember the first time I was in a car that had that technology. It was probably 15 years ago. One of my neighbors got a new BMW. We were driving up to the mountains to go snowboarding, and he was changing lanes willy-nilly without looking. I was like, oh my God, dude, like, what are you doing? He's like, oh no, the car will tell me, like, if there's a car there. I was like, hopefully, but what if it gets, like, the sensors are dusty? Like, I don't know, like, you get a lot of, when you come back from the mountains every time, your car's pretty dusty. Like, so I was having a hard time, and like, that's a good example of where a lot of people assume this technology will make things safer. Like, it will if you add it on to what we're doing now. So if you look over your shoulders and add the technology to it, it should lead to safety. But if we start replacing what we used to do, the safety question is not as simple. So if you're relying on the technology entirely to change lanes, maybe it isn't safer. So same with like backup cameras and stuff like that. Like all that stuff we hope is better. We just assume it's better, but it's not as easy. Safety stuff is tricky.
Yeah, you're switching lanes. You ideally have a technology that makes that safer, but like let's start maybe with making shifting lanes a safe process, right? And like whatever that is, speed limits or visual friction, all that kind of stuff.
Well, even in a lot of parts of Denver, you have these big arterials that have probably more lanes than we need, right? So if we have fewer lanes, you don't need to switch lanes as much. Like so it's the one thing to do it on highways, but if we have more of a network where you have more than one option, because a lot of this part of Denver, like you only have one option to get from A to B. You have to go in that arterial, and therefore we have to make those arterials really big with a lot of lanes. There's a lot of lane switching, and that's where a lot of the safety problems come in. If you have another option, you can just move over one block and get from A to B. It lets you build smaller streets where lane switching is not a big of an issue. And Denver has that. Like Denver is a place, just like where I grew up, like where if there's a crash, if there's traffic on one street, you just move over a block or two. And keep going. You never have to stop.
Yeah, that's great. We can wrap up soon. The one thing I'm interested in, and this comes up a lot, is Denver Fire has a very specific. They are maximalist when it comes to fire safety, as they should be. We want a fire department that is maximalist when it comes to fire safety. They often run up against the street advocates, safety advocates, and street designers and engineers who are trying to make a more safe street. How can those conversations be navigated? And what advice would you give to somebody who is in a situation where the fire department says, actually, we need the street to be wider because big fire truck?
This is a huge topic. This is actually a topic I was going to bring up to David to be my topic on one of the future podcasts.
Tune in.
Yeah, tune in. But it's interesting because when we look at the data from Denver's fire department, they respond to 3 times more car crashes than fires.
Wow.
Right? So if you build streets that are safer, that helps them out as well. The other thing I'd say is that a lot of times you need to sort of treat what they think is good almost like a tactical urbanism project too. Like I know when Denver was doing those mini roundabouts, like the traffic circles in the neighborhoods, they got some complaints from some of the fire marshals or whatever. But when Tool Design is the ones that did the first ones, they literally brought out the fire truck and they drew the big circle on the ground and they tested it. And Tool filmed them doing it. And you put those the firefighters in a competitive situation, like, oh yeah, I can definitely do that. They did it, and then later other people were complaining. It's like, no, look, you can do it. You guys told us that this was fine. So I think you need to treat it like an experiment. Like let them see it and let them try it. And the last thing I'd say is we have plenty of neighborhoods in Denver that were built like before traffic engineers existed that are technically too narrow from what they would want. Whenever there's been a fire on those streets, they get there. Right? They don't have that problem on those streets, but for some reason we can't build those same streets elsewhere. So there's a disconnect there that I think we can do a better job reconciling.
Yeah. Great. Well, last question. I'll wrap up here, which is, Denver's made a number of, I think, advancements in the past few years, and there's good conversation right now happening about street safety and design. What's something that you're seeing around the world that you're excited about if it could be brought to Denver?
That's a hard question because
Good.
a lot of people will go to Europe and say, "Oh, we need to do this in Denver," but it's not that easy. Whenever you talk to a U.S. engineer, you say, "Oh, here's what Copenhagen's doing. Here's what Amsterdam's doing," like their eyes glaze over, like, "Oh, we can't possibly
Sure.
do that." And that's actually one of the reasons I took my sabbatical in Australia, because they're honestly doing a lot of similar things to those European countries, but for whatever reason, American engineers feel like they're more culturally similar to Australia.
Yeah,
But you say, "Oh, Sydney's doing this," they're like, "Oh yeah, we can do that."
Yeah, they're just like us with silly voices. Yeah.
But it's just like Denver makes for a good example for other cities. Like if
Yeah.
I tell you that Boulder's doing something or Portland, again, people's eyes glaze over. But if you say like Charlotte or Denver are doing things, then people listen. Like, oh, if Denver's doing it, we can do
Sure.
it. If Salt Lake's doing it, we can do it. So I think we need to stand up as a better example of what we can do. And so there's no easy answer to that, but it's not as simple as just taking like good best practices and just placing them here. Like
Sure.
it's a different beast.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah,
really
thank
appreciate it. Wes Marshall, go check out his podcast, and thanks for coming on ours.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.